Hey neighbors, the handyman here with Initiative Coffee Company along with Mole Master's own Professor Coldheart, and today we're talking about DDEX 4-4, the Marionette.
Keep going.
Today we're talking about DDEX 4-4, the Marionette. Writer Robert Alanis, editors Claire Hoffman and Travis Woodall. This is a 4-hour mod for Tier 1 play, tuned for 5 third-level characters. This mod follows up on a story from the 3 prior mods with Laszlo and his undead benefactor. It finishes with a classic dungeon crawl. Part 1, Easy Money. Module starts at the 7 tables in. The proprietors ask the party to find their nephew, Marku, that went to Vallaki for supplies and is overdue. When they investigate, they find Marku on the brink of death and must find a way to stabilize him before heading back to town and dropping him at the hospice. There, the party meets Glovia and her assistant, the 10-year-old Serena. Jake, let's start this off. You all right?
Yeah, fine. I didn't realize now I'm the first villain of the Care Bears.
Yeah.
True villain. Care Bears, and let me tell you, he's about as scary as any other named NPC in Adventures League. So, I guess
Professor Coldheart.
Yeah, I had to look that one up.
That's a deep cut.
That hurts. So this mod,
It's tough.
I like. We're talking about Easy Money, part 1.
Just part 1.
Just part 1.
Don't get ahead of Professor Coldheart.
Don't get ahead of me. Honestly, simple. Ideas were there. Really, really good.
Starts off with a direct call to action. There's some impetus behind it.
Let me be clear here. That doesn't mean that your party is going to be easy and as understanding, because our party wasn't. We sat for like 10 minutes going like, so, what do you guys want to do? And like, there was only one route.
As the innkeeper's like, go find my nephew.
We were like, let's just go like check out the city. And Brian was like, get the hell out of this town.
Just like, they went to Vallaki. Vallaki is down that road.
Yeah.
Go down that road.
Way, we travel like for like 6.5 steps, and there's like a wagon that's just busted.
Yeah.
And honestly, what was in this fight again? It was like, wasn't there a fight there? Oh no, it was describing there was a fight.
There was a fight.
And there was information that there was a white that had attacked.
No, harpies, or a white that attacked and harpies
that
picked the bodies.
And harpies that were picking at him. That's cool. That's dope. I love it.
And there's enough skill checks that you can use to like get all of that information across.
Yes, 100%. So I'm cool with it. I thought it was interesting. I think I might have just like tuned out when I heard the hospice, but then when they said, "Hey, hospice, go over there," I was like, "Oh, yep, I'm here." Are we still in that part? We are. So the hospice. Really, really cool. I think it becomes very important as a DM when going through these to make sure that you give your players names, because you have names, and like, and
here's what I will say: is Season 4 comes with like a map pack and like NPC guide. Right? Like, there's a map of Arasnau, and like all of the relevant information about Arasnau. And if you're gonna pick up the bundle pack of Season 4 for like $25 or whatever, which is a huge deal, make sure you get that campaign primer as well, because it'll definitely help, right? Like, being able to hand that to your players and say like, this should guide you through what you need to do. Is a pretty valuable resource.
Yeah. I definitely maybe put their names in chat. I don't know, but I think it's important to note people's names, because it's like I got kind of a little bit disoriented with the names. You've got Marku, you've got the 7 Inns proprietor, there's so many names.
Mm-hmm.
So I do think that there's importance in doing that. But I also would say at this point, you start the mystery starts unraveling. You get to the hospice, you learn about Glovia, Felnusku, or whatever you want to pronounce the name, and then you start learning about the assistant Serena, and you learn about the backstory from the rumors and providing some context to the Manor. This is where we mentioned it back in the last mod, where this kind of like separates into like this should be a 6-hour mod.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a comfortable 6 hours. I would maybe I would want to read it again and see what it's all about, but like there was a point in time when I was reading this and I was like, and like I felt
and it's not
like
because it's bad content. It's just a lot.
It's awesome. It's
a lot of content crammed into a 4-hour session.
2 mods
too much.
Smashed into this thing, and not even in a poor way, a very good way that it's put together.
Mm-hmm.
It's a lot to digest as a DM.
Yeah.
And once again, not an info dump, just a lot here.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not even longer than normal mods. It's just a lot of functional info. It's not superfluous or superfluous. I don't know.
Superfluous.
It's not a lot of that.
There's 2
usable
hours
info.
There's 2 hours of content here before a dungeon crawl.
Yeah.
And then there's a whole dungeon crawl. Like there's a lot of content. A lot of content to get through here. And that's, last session we talked about combining the Executioner and the Marionette as a pair of 4-hour mods, right? As like 2 halves of this one story, because there's a lot of the same characters. But honestly, this season, there's a lot of the same characters in all of the mods because it was written as a single story that your players could progress through in the most linear way that any season has really done.
Yeah.
And the most like rewarding way, I think, from the mods that I've played. I haven't played that much of season 5. I've played a lot of season 7. I've run all of season 7. I've played a little bit of 8. Like it's a whole different realm. Like this mod and this season of mods is a very like cohesive story.
Yep.
It seems like the writers were working together in ways that they haven't in other seasons.
Don't know why they moved away.
For better or worse, I don't know why they pushed away from that. I don't.
And you also are seeing a lot of names here that as writers that you didn't see 1, 2, or 3.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we've had unique writers, I think, in the last 3 mods.
Mm-hmm.
And that just goes to show that there was a different writing standard.
Mm-hmm.
I think this was more of, because of Strahd and how it's sold in terms of Wizards, it definitely put a lot of people on, like, put on your best behavior, put on your best writer's cap, because these are solid mods. I don't think any of the mods we've run thus far, we're only 4 in,
and they're dark.
Solid
they're
mods.
Also very dark mods. So there has to be a lot of trust in the writing team to be able to navigate that in a way that doesn't seem gratuitous and doesn't seem inappropriate for their 13 plus or 15 plus or whatever audience that they've decided for this season, right? I wonder if some of these folks have a longer history in Barovia, in a similar way that like the Eberron book was written by folks who were more familiar with Eberron, in the similar way that where was I going? In the similar way that like the Ravnica book was written by folks who were familiar with Ravnica, like those kinds of aspects. I wonder if they had the same kind of approach in season 4 here. All in all, I think there's a lot of good content here. Your players, this is a season where your players have to take notes. They have to take notes. If they don't, it's going to be to their detriment. And I'm not particularly a player that takes a lot of notes. And so for me, like it would be a pretty substantial adjustment if I was playing instead of running to keep all of these NPCs straight. Because even if they aren't specifically mentioned in other mods, like they're in town because they live in town. Like you've experienced them in town. So I think there's a lot to kind of keep track of. Shops, buildings, NPCs, locations, kind of a general mental map of where things are. Like there's a lot to keep track of here.
Yeah, and I just I like I once again I like it. It's cool. It's awesome.
Mm,
But hey, let's get back to this mod as we're plowing through this thing. So
sure.
we we're at part.
Part two, the reading. As things finish up at the hospice, a town crier comes out shouting, indicating the party should have a chat with the Burgermeister at his estate. When they arrive, he is there with Sybil, the Gur from DDEX 4-1. Sybil gives the party disjointed clues from a vision she had and conducts a reading that sends them into a dream world. The dream sequence introduces horror checks, resulting in short term madness. Additionally, the party can draw a few clues about both this module and Barovia overall. The reading ends as Laszlo bursts in and steals the powder box, the powder box the party sought out in DDEX 4-3 from the dream state. I liked the most interesting part of this mod for me is these horror checks, right? Because it's not something I've ever seen before in modules for AL, and I like the mechanic. I think maybe it is underdeveloped, but ultimately I like this notion of like spooky things happen and your players have to deal with that and deal with like the mental consequences of having witnessed these spooky things, right?
Well, this is kind of the issue that I also see is that we see this in AO mods. And this is not for everyone's viewing pleasure because you have to be going to cons and stuff. But there's horror checks that are abundant in a lot of the AL admins mods. And it's like, what is a horror check? Is it a wisdom save? Is it an intelligence save?
Sure,
As you
and
said, it's underdeveloped.
well,
And I
it
like
gets explained here within the dream sequence, right? They're all constitution saves to like maintain your concentration on the dream sequence, right? But these horror checks extend into the rest of this module, and it doesn't. I don't know that I would consider it a constitution save
No, I wouldn't.
later on. I would think of it as like an intelligence or a wisdom save, frankly. But there's no like transition once they leave the dream state.
But my next question I always want to pose is we're in a sequence of Barovia where like everything is like the senses are dulled.
Mm-hmm.
So why I mean, granted, we're not saying we are natives of Barovia right now, but why if we've now dealt with werewolves, people being eaten, potential pitchfork battle last mod where 10 plus townsfolk got ravaged by 4 low level undead. Why now that boils on a girl's face apparently cause con checks, horror checks?
Yeah, I suppose like we've approached Barovia as kind of this grayscale place where important things are in color, right?
Yeah.
So maybe there's a particularly colorful aspect to these horror things. Maybe you just incorporate these horror checks earlier on, right? Like maybe if you're going to run this whole season, start with them in 4-2 when they get to Barovia. Or at the end of 4-1.
With the bats.
Right?
Yeah.
With the bats or with the zombies, so maybe you incorporate this rule set earlier on. Maybe like this is where it starts because that dream sequence triggers it. I don't. You're gonna have to come up with a justification as to why these start in this mod. I don't know that I wouldn't continue these throughout the rest of the season. I think they're interesting. I think you're gonna have to come up with aspects in other modules more than likely where these will be relevant.
Yeah.
But I think it could be a very interesting like way to keep especially your veteran players on their toes when like they're used to everything, but this is a new rule, right? There's a lot of those kinds of things that can really diversify tables and make things a little bit more interesting.
I mean, other than that, I don't think there's much more to say. I just want to have more about. I agree with you though with the idea of seeing more of these horror checks earlier on, because if we're gonna make this a more prominent idea. I mean, maybe you're more familiar with it further on because you are DMing it. That are there more horror checks that we see, or does it just now drop off? Like, are we gonna see that?
I don't know. I haven't read ahead yet. So,
but it's something I definitely would love to keep doing.
mm-hmm.
Maybe not incessantly, where gets a little out of hand.
Once or twice per mod, maybe.
That to me makes sense.
On the most gratuitous parts.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's other interesting things in this dream sequence. There's these like these spectacles that allow your players to see things in a different way. They get to have a very limited introduction to the notion of Strahd, right? Strahd is not someone who comes up in season 4. He's focused in the hard book. He doesn't happen, but his control of the region and his kind of authority and decisions have real impacts in all of the modules here. So I
do have to say there's cool. It brings up also something in the cider.
Mm-hmm.
It gives a non-abusive way to give your players resources back.
That's true.
That isn't a direct short/long rest. If you're in an AL setting, it's a nice thing to do, just to skip stuff along.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of saying, "Oh, well, you just slept an hour," but like, it's a nice little like. Reprieve.
It's a crutch, not a crutch, but it's a nice tool to use to give your players the benefit of a short rest.
That doesn't take you out of the game
because it's built into the setting of the narrative.
Yeah, like typically when you say short or long rest, people are like, oh, "Okay," but like when you say, "Oh, random short rest," out of like you just taking a sip of it, or taking a bite of an apple, or whatever the hell you want to do. It's kind of a nice little like touch where like you don't have it doesn't cause a break. Like I don't say a natural break, but it doesn't cause like a we just had a long fight, let's have a short rest. It's like take your 2 seconds, fix your character sheet, let's get back to it.
Right.
And I do like that as a writing narrative because it doesn't force problems, I guess.
And it's
force ridiculous.
It's nice because the other times that these kinds of like free short rests come up, I think about like epics where they come up all the time. Where like, if enough people succeed in their task, the whole party gets the benefit of a short rest. But there's no like narrative trigger for that. It's just like, oh, you guys decide to take an hour in the middle of this.
You guys are
mass warfare. Like what? Like it just doesn't.
How about
track.
You take a Slim Jim?
Right, it just doesn't track well. And so the fact that they took the time to build it into the setting of the narrative really makes a difference, really makes an impact for me. So, Part 3, Laszlo's attack. The reading is interrupted by an attack from several undead intended to force Glovia's hand. Glovia was responsible for raising Laszlo as a wight. Laszlo's attack is fended off through a series of 4 encounters similar to a skill challenge. The final encounter is the only one that is a combat encounter with a ghast in company. When the dust settles, the party finds out that Glovia has kidnapped Serena and heads off to her estate just outside of town. Serena's father has chased after them. This is a cool, I'm a sucker for skill checks. I don't think that surprises anyone.
No, what?
But I like to see them incorporated into modules. This isn't the way I do skill checks by any means, but I like to see potential combats dealt with in non-combat ways for the sake of time. Frankly,
sure.
I'm amused at the fact that they shortcutted 4 combats here, only to still have a 6-hour module. Right, like it's still a long module even with this shortcut built in, but I think all of these mini encounters are valuable in their own way. Like it lets your players look at the rest of their character sheet and come up with meaningful ways to avoid the death of townspeople, which is cool.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's much to say about this. You summed it up well. It's a skill challenge set. I really do like it. It's and it's not a harmful party split.
No, because the way I would describe it, if your party is worried about splitting the party because it comes up all the time, I would describe this as like you can see where all of these encounters are. Like the town is small enough that it doesn't matter which encounter each player goes to. Like everybody can still see each other. They're just dealing with different things on different sides of this courtyard. And usually when like I expect players to split the party and I explain something like that to them, they are a lot more willing to split the party than they would be if they were like going miles in different directions or like going down opposite tunnels in a cavern, like those kinds of things that get players nervous, right?
Yeah, I agree. I'm much more comfortable when you say, Jake, there's a bunch of encounters, here you go, because of the way it's described.
Mhm.
And if it's part of the description where it's like, hey, this needs to get done, and there's multiple options brought up, I find that it's a lot easier to bring myself to, hey, let's split the party. I don't care. I mean, as a player, if it's I don't say making the guise of, hey, oh, my character would have done it, but like under the statement of, I'm going to go do this because my character associates with this in a four outlet solution that you need to figure out. It's a lot more comfortable for me to do that. And as you said, it's to the degree of we're not splitting the party maliciously.
Right.
You're doing so in a way that helps solve the town's problem of a freaking undead attack.
Yeah. An undead attack that should have probably been the finale to the last mod.
Yeah.
Because there's enough here to like make it feel worthwhile, right? I don't think the other thing is I don't think any of these encounters, if you had all 5 members of your party go to any of these encounters, 3 of those 5 people would do nothing while the other 2 did finish the encounter, right? So like none of these encounters are big enough to warrant your whole party. And I feel like you can even describe that. Be like, hey, like, there's 2 zombies attacking commoners over there and a wall of timbers that could be knocked over on top of them if you led them into the alley. There's a building on fire and someone that needs help if one person can go and unlock the cage in the prison, right? Like those kinds of things.
I think what's a big boon to our party, and I will say this because we are playing a longer style campaign, then it is we have a cohesive group.
Yeah.
I was, being in the AL setting and being a DM, I have an Aarakocra because I've ran so much.
Yeah.
But I'm not trying to be abusive towards it.
Sure.
But in a skill-based challenge, I was playing. I was with my my bard that had that was playing like death metal music or rock music, some music, aggressive music, and it pulled away the horde, and then we were able to knock over the timbers. The timbers. Each of our players in our party, I think that's what makes it so nice, is that we are able to positively complement each other. And I think that really shines in group-based skill challenges. Maybe not a full group, but these minute groups.
Right. These faction these fractionalized pairs and triads and
I think that is where these skill-based challenges really excel, because when you get to like the 5th person and trying to track something, it's like there's only so much we can talk about.
Yeah.
Like, the first person's gonna say, I'm gonna look for tracks. Second person's gonna say, I'm gonna see possible moving paths. I'm X, Y, and then you get to the 5th person, you're like, I want to go open a tree, even though we're in a warded area.
Right.
And like, we're all talking the same thing, just trying to argue the skill check.
Sure.
When you have these small 3 person based skill challenges, I think it really does show. And I like the fact that they gave us a skill challenge that makes sense. And I don't know. I like this one a lot because it felt organic, natural.
Sure. Yeah.
And it let our party, definitely our specific group, excel in our small microcosm groups more efficiently.
I agree. Part 4 of the Manor. Manor is laid out like a traditional dungeon crawl through an estate. Over 3 levels, several encounters occur, including one with a small girl from the vision earlier on, the dead daughter of Glovia. Upstairs, the party encounters whimsical horror creatures like toy soldiers and swarms of dolls. Serena's father, Boris, has been strung up in a puppet theater with hooks and strings pierced through him. The party encounters back-to-back stiff encounters with Glovia's husband, a flesh golem, created after she murdered him, and Glovia herself, a mage. After the encounter Glovia is dealt with, her daughter passes on, no longer held there by her necromantic mother, and Serena and Boris are rescued. There is a lot of ground to cover in the manor. It's 3 levels. The rooms are broken out just like any other dungeon. You look at the hard books, that they're broken out very similarly to the hard books. There's probably 7 or 8 combats that could occur. There's a lot to get through, and frankly, they recommend 2 hours for this section. Yeah, at least. I would err on the side of 2.5, maybe even 3, to really explore every aspect. If you're short on time, cut out the basement. There's not really anything in the basement that's valuable other than a mimic to surprise your party members. Other than that, it's a typical dungeon crawl, but it's done so in a very interesting way. There's a lot of like horror whimsy elements, I guess. Other than that, I don't know. What do you think, Chick?
So, I really like this dungeon crawl. I really, really do. But we go back and say, why is this a 4-hour mod?
This dungeon crawl is the same length as Dues for the Dead, which in and of itself was a 4-hour module, right? Like, it is the same number of like encounters as Dues for the Dead, and Dues for the Dead is only the dungeon, right? This is a dungeon plus a skill challenge, plus a narrative aspect, plus a dream sequence. Like, this is not a 4-hour mod.
No, it's it gets a little wild, and by a little I mean a lot.
Yeah.
There's a lot of dumb stuff happening in here, and by dumb I mean cool and like interesting and unique, and it's just so info intensive. And there's a mimic a casket. There's swarms of like there's just enough encounters here to last you.
You could spend 2
4
sessions.
hours.
Yeah, you could spend
4 hours.
Easily 4 hours. Yeah, you could put a little bit of effort into this and make it 6. Just this dungeon, just the estate, if you wanted.
So I guess when we get down to it, I do like this area. I do like when you get to the top floor, the toy soldiers. I like that. I think the end room was kind of confusing.
Sure.
Because it was like there's a hole, and then there's like a gibbering mouther, which are
Downstairs,
awful creatures.
There's a gibbering mouther on the ground beneath the hole on the first level, yeah.
And those creatures suck.
They're not good. No.
No, they're not. And, I think it's interesting. I think they're fun. I think the toy soldiers are cool. I think there's a lot of unique concepts.
They just
the
don't give you
ghost
enough
is
time.
here.
Yeah.
Her child's here. Is Isabella or whatever her name is.
There's more cider here, which is nice.
Yeah, there's more cider. There's just very neat areas here. It kind of also just once again ties in the fact that there's a lot going on in this storyline. Finding out that Glovia is really a necromantic mom,
and not like the biggest bad, right? She's a necromancer who works for someone else, but Laszlo works for her, right? There's another player it's in the game, right? Like the most rewarding part about this series of modules is every one of them leads so fundamentally into the next that you never feel disjointed when you pick it up, right? You feel like you are a major component. I mean, that presumably 4-14, right? Like, presumably in the 14th module when you leave Barovia. I don't know. Like,
no, we're not allowed to. I guess, it just comes down to, we're taking out we're slowly taking out this criminal organization, it feels like. But like,
But, you know,
you're right.
potentially.
Glovia's not a bad person. She's actually like a nurse.
Yeah, and they do describe her as like very focused on hospice care and nursing and very like good in that aspect, but also a necromancer who wants to abduct this child and make her daughter again. Like all of the villains' motivations are present, as opposed to oftentimes in other modules where the villains are just like melodramatic villains and you don't really know where they're coming from, right? Like you understand like Glovia lost her daughter when she was young and tried to resurrect her. Her husband told her it was a foul magic, so she killed him. Like all of these like she's made.
And he's a flesh golem now.
He's a flesh golem now because she needed him around. Like there's a lot here that like explores how far she will go to bring her daughter back, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's interesting. I think it's rewarding. I think it adds depth to this character that isn't present in a lot of like villains in, you know, not just AL but D&D in general, you know, like you look at Zarlaxle, who's a mercenary, but he's an outcast from his house, but you don't see a lot of history in Dragon Heist. Maybe in some of the novels, but you know, you can't expect everybody who's playing to read the novels. So, what? So yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot here. I think
this is a solid mod. It's got a lot
solid
going
mod.
in it. Just
it's
don't
a long
play
haul.
it for 4 hours.
Yeah, it's a long haul to get through. This is one of the times where things get very gruesome and gratuitous. When they describe Boris strung up in the puppet theater, these are I wouldn't play this season for 13-year-olds is what it comes down to.
I mean, I think I would still, because I say that because it, as we spoke about in the last mod, it feels like the people writing these mods are people that seem like they've had a past in Barovia.
Sure. That's
where
true.
they can tastefully do things. Where this, if anything, was the most grotesque we've seen.
Mm-hmm.
And we're, 19 hours or 16? We're 4 times 4 plus another hour. We're 15 hours or 7. I can't do math. 17 hours into this game, or into AL mods, and or it's probably less than that.
Couple of
2 hour mods, whatever.
Mods,
yeah, where we have situations where there hasn't been anything so extremely detailed. I mean, we did have someone potentially getting like hung, like, which gets into pretty gore detail. But like that was an option that like never happens. Like you just be like, hey, how about you just don't go back to town?
Yeah.
And don't kill yourself.
Yeah.
Like.
Yeah, I will say that like D&D is advertised 13 and up, and I think this season really gets every ounce of 13 and up they can out of their modules.
They could say the F word how many times? 2 times?
One time, yeah.
Oh.
And it's a lot of times on forums I read like, how young is too young to start your kids on D&D? And frankly, like 13 is probably a good time to start your kids on D&D. Like, if you have to fundamentally change the rule set because you want your younger kids to be able to play, it's not D&D. You can play it, that's fine. It just isn't D&D. Like we don't play D&D on Thursday nights for our homebrew, right? We play a weird hybrid system that I make up largely on the fly. But it's not D&D, right? It has a lot of elements from D&D. But like, I think they're really leaning into 13 and up in this season in general, but specifically this module.
I guess, yeah. I think they did it tastefully. It was like grotesque tasteful.
Sure.
And like that sounds weird, but like it's also to the point where I could say, you know what, it isn't bad enough where I'm like going like, I think I might have done like,
I don't think
during game.
Yeah,
but like,
I don't think
it was
it's
because it was good. It was a narrative element that felt good. It just was like, whoa.
I don't think gruesome is necessarily off the table, right? I think it's appropriate for a 13 and up crowd. And I think the game is built for a 13 and up crowd. I think it is fully in line with like the expectations of the publisher, the expectations of the author, and the organization.
One thing I will mention is timing. We just got through 4, potentially 6, potentially 8 hours of D&D, and you're hitting me with the guide that was strung up by wires. If that isn't the fastest refocusing moments, I don't know what is.
Which maybe is valuable, right? That refocusing moment.
Because I think that actually was one of those things that I was like, wow, we've done how much we've done so much work through the last 4 or 5 hours of gaming, and then it was like, hey, we have puppets, or we have toy soldiers. We've got a husband that's a flesh golem. We have a necromantic mom.
Swarms of dolls.
We have a gibbering Mouther just hanging out. We have a ghost daughter.
Yeah.
We have all this, and it's like, oh, by the way, this dude's hung up by fish wire, essentially.
Yeah.
And that was a separate thought.
While toy soldiers and dolls laugh at him.
Yes. And that was a very harrowing / sobering moment that, I feel like if you see the title screen, Welcome to Barovia afterwards, I've been like, oh, we just finished the intro.
Yeah.
And
this is what Barovia is.
Oh,
okay.
This is Barovia, or Dark Souls. And it's oh, okay. It was I feel like, thinking about it now, it was a very strategically placed gruesome moment to go, oh lordy, wow, what's happening next week? Yeah. Which makes me I haven't been concerned, but makes me kind of concerned, what does 4-5 look like?
Sure.
How are they going to follow up my last adventure in Barovia being toy soldiers saluting / laughing at a guy that was
right,
literally a marionette?
And the benefit here is, that's the benefit of these authors working together, right? Is every author is setting up for the people to be interested in the next module.
Yeah.
Right. And I don't know what the writing idea was. We've talked about this to death. I don't know what the writing concept was here, but it works, right? It works more than other seasons, and I'm excited to play through the rest of it. So.
Yep.
Anyway, so there it is, DDX 4-4, the Marionette. Thank you so much for listening to some advice to streamline and run it at your tables. Be a good neighbor, give us a thumbs up, and subscribe. Toll the Dead for notifications. Check out our Patreon where you can see the playthroughs for these mods at the $5 tier. Find us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. And from now, until the next time, roll together.